Week 10 of the fantasy football season. Here's wide receiver starts at every matchup this week. Thursday Night Football division matchup in the AFC West. Vegas Raiders at the Denver Broncos. The Raiders got Brock Bowers back in last week's game. He went over 120 yards, found the end zone 3 times in that one. But Jacoby Myers, Trey Tucker still haven't done anything for this Vegas Raider team. We'll see if Jacoby Myers is traded at the deadline here, but time of recording this, obviously no trade went down. And he just has been a mess all season long. Him and Geno Smith haven't been on the same page. He requested a trade early in the season and in training camp. And this week at the Broncos, one of the better defenses in the league, he's a sit. And same with Trey Tucker. He'll have a couple pop games here and there. I think Geno and Tucker are more locked in than obviously Geno and Jacoby Myers. But now with Brock Bowers back in the lineup, he's going to get a lot of targets, obviously, and a lot of big touches, what we saw in last week's game versus the Jaguars. Now to the Broncos, Cortland Sutton to start. He does have 3 games in a row with double-digit fantasy points, but the targets are way down, the fantasy points are down as well for Cortland Sutton. But still, even though he's struggling, he's finding a way to be in that fringe wide receiver 2 flex option for owners. And this week in a good matchup, in a high scorer most likely on Thursday night, he's a start. Troy Franklin, a fringe option. Franklin's definitely improved over the last few weeks. Had a big game in Week 8 versus the Cowboys. We had 89 yards and 2 touchdowns. And last week, a mediocre game, it was for Franklin. But this week, like I said, this defense of the Raiders can't stop anyone, and he's a fringe option. Atlanta Falcons at the Indianapolis Colts, another overseas bowl game in this one. Drake London, a must start. Last week, a monster game after he missed Week 8's game in a disaster loss to the Miami Dolphins, where London found the end zone 3 times. So this week in Indianapolis, they give up points. They do get to the quarterback and create turnovers. But London, obviously, a must start. Darnell Mooney, a down season it's been for him. He was better with Kirk Cousins last season in their quarterback, but him and Penix just haven't been on the same page. And Bijan Robinson and London pretty much 60-70% of this offense, he's a sit. Michael Pittman a start, and Alec Pierce a start. Pittman, what a bounce-back season it's been for him. And Daniel Jones has turned this whole offense around, and a lot of players, obviously, on this Indianapolis Colts team are fantasy options. So Pittman went over 100 yards last week in a loss versus the Steelers. And this week, I think he goes out there and it's a good game versus the Falcons secondary that isn't that good. Alec Pierce start. He went over 100 yards as well. In the last few weeks, he's been more than just a deep ball threat, is Alec Pierce, where he's running routes and he's making plays. And when defense is obviously a load in the box, worrying about Jonathan Taylor, worried about Pittman and the tight end Tyler Warren, it's going to open up things for Pierce one-on-one coverage, and he's making the plays. Josh Downs, a fringe option. He's definitely been playing better over the last month of the season, is Josh Downs. But the only thing for me with Josh Downs, he's been a touchdown-dependent wide receiver for this Indianapolis Colts team. And just how many guys week in and week out on the same offense are going to be consistent putting up numbers. So this week, in a good matchup, arguably he's the 5th option in this offense is Josh Downs, behind Jonathan Taylor, behind Pittman, Warren, Alec Pierce. He's a fringe option for me. Now to the Cleveland Browns at the New York Jets, Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, who could come off IR possibly in this game, and Isaiah Bond sits for me. These wide receivers have done nothing all season long. Dylan Gabriel, he's been okay at times, but pretty much it's Quinshon Judkins and the tight ends and Harold Fannin and David Njoku going out there and making plays for this Cleveland Brown team. So this week, like I said, even in a good matchup, those are sits. Garrett Wilson a start. He's going to practice this week, head coach Aaron Glenn said. And Garrett Wilson, the only viable fantasy option really in the receiving room, even though the New York Jets did get their first win in Week 8 at Cincinnati without Garrett Wilson. But this week versus the Browns, he's a start, even versus a good defense, and possibly Denzel Ward on him a majority of the game. New Orleans Saints at the Carolina Panthers, Chris Olave a start. Olave, it doesn't look like he's going to be traded from this New Orleans Saints team. The target's going to be there. And the only thing with Olave, it's been if he's going to stay healthy. And so far, through the first 9 weeks of the season, he's been healthy. So this week in a matchup versus a mediocre defense of the Panthers, he's a star. Rashid Shaheed is a fringe option. We know Shaheed, he's been a deep ball threat and nothing for a majority of his career. But this season, he's playing a little bit better in terms of running routes and making plays is Rashid Shaheed. I know this is a bad offense. They're going to be trailing just about every game this season where they only got 1 win on the end. This week at Carolina, I think there's some plays that could be out there for Shaheed in this one, but also as well, we'll see if he gets traded by the deadline here today. Is Shaheed. Tator McMillan a start. It's been a solid rookie season for the most part for Tator McMillan. I know last week it was a down game for him where it was the Rico Dotto show. We had 130 yards and found the end zone twice, but this week in a matchup versus Saints that can't stop anyone. He's a start. Xavier Legette, Jalen Coker, we've seen nothing from these guys. And this offense pretty much, in terms of fantasy football, it's Rico Dotto and McMillan, the only guys who really have value. So Legette and Coker, easy sits even in a plus matchup. New England Patriots at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Stephon Diggs has been a touchdown-dependent wide receiver over the last couple weeks. Diggs, though, it's been a solid year, I think, for him, coming off an ACL, where obviously he came back quicker than anyone who's had the injury, it seemed like Diggs, where he didn't miss a game, and he was there for training camp. So this week at Tampa Bay, he's a start where this could be a high-scoring game, and Drake May's the type of quarterback already in his second year, spreading that football out, and a lot of players are putting up numbers. Kayshon Boutte, he's banged up with a hamstring injury. It's not looking good that he's going to play in this game. He's day-to-day right now, might not open the week up practicing, and Boutte left the game last week in the victory versus the Falcons with the hamstring injury. So to me, if he does go out there and plays a fringe option, and Demario Douglas a fringe option where he's getting more involved in the offense and he's more of a deep ball threat now than ever is Douglas, where him and May are connecting, and he had his best game of the season last week. 4 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown. Emeka Egbuka start. Mike Evans most likely out for pretty much the rest of the regular season. And Egbuka is going to step in easily as the number 1 wide receiver. I know the last couple of weeks the numbers have been down, but Egbuka wasn't 100% as well, where he was dealing with a hamstring injury. But for him, he didn't miss a game at least. But now if he's back after the bye and almost 100% healthy, I think it could be a big boost for fantasy owners in this Buck team. Chris Godwin, we'll see if he plays in this ball game for this Buck team. Is Chris Godwin. It's been an injury-plagued season going back to last year. We had a bad injury on Monday Night Football, but came back pretty quick. So for Godwin, I still think he'll be on a snap count. He's a fringe option if he plays. And Tez Johnson, he's been a good target for Baker Mayfield and this Buck team over the last few weeks. So for him as well, he's a fringe option. Luke, obviously, Kate Otten said Chris Godwin's back, and then you got Tez Johnson. It'll be that 4th or 5th option in this offense, especially if Bucky Irvin returns to the lineup as well. Baltimore Ravens at the Minnesota Vikings. Zay Flowers a start. I know the numbers haven't been great this season, but he's a guy pretty much 10, 11 points will be his floor for Zay Flowers. And now with Lamar Jackson back in the lineup, and last week they put up a lot of points easily, even though it was the Miami Dolphins. Zay Flowers to me is a star. Rashad Bateman a sit in this game. Rashad Bateman, he did find the end zone last week, but targets haven't been there consistently. We know this offense is Jackson, Henry, Zay Flowers, and Andrews, the only guys who are really going to have fantasy value. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison as starts. Jefferson, he found the end zone last week, a nice one-handed grab in the back of the end zone. And him and McCarthy have been working on rapport, even though McCarthy, we know, he was out for 2 months with his injury and just returned to the lineup. And Jordan Addison, solid receiver, could run the routes, gets that single coverage. And this Baltimore secondary and defense overall this season hasn't been good. And they just traded away Jair Alexander as well to the Philadelphia Eagles. So I think both these receivers are starts. Buffalo Bills at the Miami Dolphins. Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid, the only 2 options in this pass game I could trust for this Buffalo Bill team. So Shakir had a decent ball game last week. Josh Allen, last 2 games, he's gone out there playing at that MVP type level once again. And this week in a great matchup with the Dolphins, he's a star. Keon Coleman, we just haven't seen enough consistency week in and week out. I thought Coleman coming out last season would be a big part of this offense and could have been the number 1 wide receiver, but we haven't seen it. He's a sit. Jalen Waddle, he's a start in this one. Waddle, 3 out of 4 games, he's played well for this Dolphin team. And pretty much him and Devon Achane, the only 2 good options in terms of fantasy football for this Dolphin team. So if they're going to be trailing early and often and chasing points, obviously targets and receptions will be there for Waddle. Malik Washington is sit. He's been a gadget guy more than anything, filling in for Tyreek Hill, who's obviously out for the season, and he's been out now over the last few weeks here. But Malik Washington, to me, he's nothing more than a guy that'll touch the football a few times. Pretty much don't have a high ceiling at all. New York Giants at the Chicago Bears. Wan'Dale Robinson, he's a fringe option for me in this game. Robinson last week, a lot of catches, but not a lot of yards in this one, and that's where his upside isn't great, where he's not really much of a deep ball threat. He's an underneath route runner, good hands, good route running ability, but like I said, big playability, few and far between for Robinson. And this week, even in a good matchup at a bad defense that gives up a lot of points, he's a fringe option, and same with Darius Slayton. So Slayton, I've thought the last 2 weeks back in the lineup for this Giant team, he could do a little bit of everything. Going back to week 8 of Philly, he had a long touchdown called back on an offensive pass and interference. And then last week, a decent game, 5 catches, 62 yards. So Slayton, he'll get some targets in this ball game. Obviously, they're decimated in the receiving room, and obviously Scatterbo out for the season as well. So he's a fringe option. Now to the Bears, Rome Odunze, DJ Moore starts. I know Odunze last week, they put up 47 points, and he had a goose egg for fantasy owners. But Odunze, for the majority of the season, he's been consistent. I know the last few weeks he's been in a slump, obviously, but I think this week versus a bad Giants secondary, he gets back on track. He's a start. And DJ Moore, the last 2 weeks, he's been playing good football for the Chicago Bear team. Him and Caleb are starting to get locked in. Last week we saw him run some plays out of the backfield as well when he found the end zone. So with those factors and DJ Moore looking healthy now the last few weeks, and then a good matchup, he's a start. Jacksonville Jaguars at the Houston Texans. Brian Thomas, it's been a sophomore slump for him to say the least. Injuries, dropping passes, and not performing have been a problem, obviously, for Brian Thomas Jr. And now he's banged up as well with an ankle injury, leaving early in that game at the Vegas Raiders in Week 9. But if he does play, he's a start for me. And Parker Washington, now with Travis Hunter, we know he's out at least 3-4 more weeks with the knee injury. Last week he filled in with Washington, and we saw Donnie Brown go down with a concussion as well. And arguably going into this game, if Thomas don't play, he could be the number one option in this offense. So a hot waiver wire pickup is Parker Washington, and he's coming off a game with 17 fantasy points in PPR league. So he's a fringe option. Nico Collins a start. Returned last week from a concussion. Solid ball game it was for him. We know CJ Stroud, he went in concussion protocol. We'll see if he plays, but I don't know if he is. But with Davis Mills in there, quarterback, and in a pretty good matchup, I still think Nico Collins, you put him in that lineup, and he's a good start. Christian Kirk, Jaden Higgins, these guys, they don't really put up numbers. Inconsistent season it's been for both. I know Higgins more because he's a rookie, obviously. He's got to get used to the NFL and this playbook and stuff like that. But like I said, pretty much this offense is Woody Marks, Nico Collins, and Dalton Schultz, the only guys you really could trust for this Texan team. Next game, Arizona Cardinals at the Seattle Seahawks. Marvin Harrison is starting. He had one of the better games of his career, even though it was at the Dallas Cowboys on Monday Night Football in Week 9. 7 catches, 96 yards, and a touchdown, and a couple plays they left on the table. Him and Brissett just missing. So Marvin Harrison, we've seen a couple good games from him this season. This offense has been better over the last few weeks with Brissett in their quarterback, and this week, even in a tougher matchup at Seattle, he's a start. Jackson Smith, the Jigboy start, one of the best receivers in all fantasy football. He can run all the routes, he can make the plays, good yard after catch guy. Him and Sam Darnold locked in. And this week, versus mediocre defense, he's an easy start. Cooper Kupp, looks like he's going to come back in this week's ball game, but Cooper Kupp, it's been a down year for him in his first season with the Seattle Seahawks, and maybe his best years are behind him, and obviously that's why the Los Angeles Rams cut him loose. So this week, he's a fringe option at best, is Cooper Kupp. Not a lot of upside, obviously, with JSN easily the number one wide receiver over there in Seattle. Torrey Horton, a sit. Torrey Horton, he had a nice game last week filling in for Cooper Kupp, who was out 4 catches, 44 yards, and 2 touchdowns at the Commanders. But like I said, with Cooper Kupp back in the lineup, he's going to be the number 3 wide receiver, and we really haven't seen much from Horton when Kupp's been in the lineup this season. Detroit Lions at the Washington Commanders. Amon-Ra St. Brown, we know he's a stud wide receiver, one of the best wideouts in all fantasy football and pro football. And this week in a matchup at the Commanders, who got torched last week, and now Marshawn Lattimore out for the season with a torn ACL. He's an easy start. And Jameson Williams a start as well. Over the last few weeks, he's starting to get things going and starting to put up numbers a little bit like he did last year. It was JMO. So like I said, with this secondary, has been bad all season long. Arguably best corner out for the season in Lattimore. Jameson Williams, definitely a wide receiver. I would start this week, and with the Lions coming off a loss, I think they come out and start throwing that football over the yard to start the ball game. Deebo Samuel will start. Terry McLaurin, he's going to be out once again, most likely. Head coach Dan Quinn said with a quad injury. And now it's Deebo Samuel, Zach Ertz, the only 2 reliable options in the passing game for this Commander team. With backup quarterback Marcus Mariota, where he's going to start for the majority of the season or the rest of the season with the Jaden Daniels injury. So Deebo, we know he gets a lot of scammy bubble screens, easy PPR catches for Deebo Samuel, but obviously his numbers have dropped off over the last few weeks, and this offense as a whole has dropped off. But this week versus Detroit, someone's got to go out there and make plays, especially if they're chasing points, and he's a start this week. Los Angeles Rams at the San Francisco 49ers. See West matchup, Puka Nacua. We'll see what happens with him, but he's going to go for testing now on the chest after we saw him leave that ball game, unfortunately, once again, with a chest injury was Puka Nacua. So Nacua, one of the best receivers, obviously in fantasy football this season, but injuries held him back last year, and again this season now, winning that lineup over the last few weeks. If he does play Nacua, obviously you lock him in as a top 5 option, worst case. Davante Adams to start. He's been a touchdown machine where he's got 5 touchdowns in the last 2 games. Him and Matthew Stafford, especially in the red zone, are getting things going. And this week at a depleted defense of the 49ers, Adams is an easy start, and especially if Nacua is out with the chest injury, he's going to go out there and get more targets. Juwan Jennings is start for me in this one. Ricky Pierce, so I don't even bother to put him on this list because he's just been out week after week for this 49er team. So Jennings found the end zone last week, almost had a second touchdown, but it should have been called passing interference. They didn't call it at the New York Giants. And this week they know they got to put points on the board versus high-powered Ram offense. He's a star. Kendrick Bourne, he had 2 great games a few weeks ago, but ever since then, he's been quiet. He's Kendrick Bourne, and defenses got onto him. So this week versus the Rams, he's a sit. Sunday night, Pittsburgh Steelers at the Chargers. DK Metcalf a start. I know last week, only 2.60 fantasy points, and I know targets haven't been there great this season for DK Metcalf, but I've said this a lot in videos. Anytime you're the number 1 option in an Aaron Rodgers offense, you're going to get targets and you're going to put up for fantasy points more weeks than not. So this week, I think at the Chargers, he bounces back. He's a start. Calvin Austin the sit. Just pretty much this offense, 2 inconsistent second options in this offense. It's been all season long. Austin, he'll have a game here and there. Jonnu Smith, he'll have a ball game here and there. And same with Pat Freiermuth. But week in and week out, these guys really aren't fantasy options. He's a sit. Lab McConkey, Quentin Johnson starts here for this Charger team. McConkey, he's been getting a lot of targets of late. He's been the more consistent wide receiver the last month of the season as well. And Quentin Johnson, after last week, he had the goose egg. He went out there, found the end zone, 4 catches, 53 yards, and a touchdown at the Titans. So this week here, tougher matchup versus Steelers, where they played a great game versus a good offense, obviously the Indianapolis Colts. Well, both these receivers I trust in this one to get things going, their starts, and Keenan Allen a fringe option. The snaps have gone down. Targets, obviously, production's gone down as well. And Keenan Allen getting phased out a little bit. And with the emergence of the tight end of Rondé Gatson, he's going to get his targets and plays in the middle of the field. So right now, out of these 3 wide receivers where they were starts for many weeks in a row, Allen at best to me is a fringe option where he's getting phased out of the offense a little bit. Philadelphia Eagles at the Packers to close it out on Monday night. A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith starts. This offense got it going the last couple weeks before the byes, where Hurts was throwing the football all over the yard. A.J. Brown, he had 2 touchdowns in that ball game before the bye week. And Devonta Smith, he's been making big plays of late. His Green Bay Packer defense, a good defense, obviously. But this Philly offense, I think they're matchup proof more weeks than not. And both these receivers are starts. But if Brown don't play, Jahan Dotson will step in to the lineup. We saw he did score a touchdown versus the New York Giants in Week 8 was Jahan Dotson, but he's a guy that's had many opportunities throughout his career, and I wouldn't trust him even if he starts. He's a sit. Romeo Doubs a start for me in this ball game. Romeo Doubs, he's been the consistent wide receiver in this lineup for this Green Bay Packer team. Now Tucker Kraft out for the season, unfortunately, a big hit for this offense, torn ACL. Some more targets can go Romeo Doubs' way. We know he's a good route runner. We know he's got good hands and could go out there and make plays. And this week, even versus a beefed-up Eagle defense, trading for J.A. Alexander and Phillips from the Miami Dolphins. Yeah, I would still start him. And Matthew Golden, we don't know if he's going to play. He's banged up now with an injury, leaving early in that game versus the Panthers in Week 9 with the shoulder. And Christian Watson, we got to see way more consistency out of him, where he only had 2 catches, 58 yards. Even on now with Tucker Kraft out, they're going to need a guy to step up in this passing game. So that's wide receiver starts it every matchup for Week 10 of the fantasy football season.